Hello and welcome to Can You Hear Me at the Back, the podcast about all things voice and communication.
Hey Aundrea!
Hi Leon.
Still want to talk about your hair.
You can.
So it's not relaxed, you just straightened it
I
because
just
you had
straightened
time
it.
off.
I
Did
didn't.
you have a day off?
I had a Saturday all to myself. That's unheard of in the voice world. I did. I had a whole Saturday just for me.
I had the day off yesterday and all I did was go for dinner with one of my best friends. Haven't seen her for a while.
That's nice.
We had Thai food.
Mm.
And we had this thing called a gung musman, which has like sweet potato in it and beef,
Yes.
and it's like a kind of. I'm
so
feeling a little bit
hungry.
drippy now.
I'm so hungry.
It's like a sort of it's like a sort of curry. It's like a Thai curry, a red Thai curry, but it's really kind of delicate flavours.
Mm.
And oh my goodness, it's got cashews in it and like shallots and sticky rice.
That's a good way to have a day off, though. It's
So
just
good.
indulging food.
I had to go all the way to Victoria for it. I
mean,
mean, say
it's worth it.
all the way. It's not that
It's
difficult.
not that far for you.
I know, I live in the Victoria line. It's not even a thing. Just 20 minutes.
Literally so
But like,
train.
no, but we had to walk and everything. It was delicious.
Mm.
And then I kept telling the woman who owns the shop, owns the restaurant, how delicious it was. And she's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, no, but it's just like creamy
It's really
and
good.
luxurious. And she's like, so you enjoyed it? I'm like, yeah, big tip. Sure, love it.
I wish people would tell me how much they liked my
Voice work.
after class. It's like, Aundrea, this is just
I had a student who used to come and shake my hand at the end of session.
That is so nice.
Yeah, annoyed me. He's very sweet, but I was like, what are you doing? Like, shake my hand at the end of the year. Not right now. It's Tuesday afternoon. Come on.
I've got young ones who are quite into hugging, and I won't allow it.
Oh no, don't hug your teachers.
I don't hug me. It's just on a practical thing. It's just germs, isn't it? It's just like I don't want your germs.
On a practical level, it's just I thought you were going to be like, it's safeguarding.
Oh yeah.
And then you're like, ew, they probably are gross.
Yeah, safeguarding. Yeah, that.
You've got a pink. So, Aundrea, in a word, no, in a sound and a movement, how do you feel?
Oh, how do I feel?
I thought that was it.
Oh, maybe it should be.
I like that.
That's it.
Is that what you're going to choose?
I'll just keep that.
I
I'll
thought
keep
I'd
that.
second guessed you.
Leon, in a sound and a movement, how do you feel?
I feel like I've done that one before.
I think you've got various variations of something happening with your tongue and your lips and the sound.
I just feel a bit sort of, I don't know, discombobulated. That's how I
I
feel.
love that word.
It's a great word.
Great word. So, what are we talking about today?
Connection.
Deep.
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 Deep. Deep connection.
Deep.
I
I wonder if there's a world in which you can have a not deep connection. Can you have just a surface connection?
mean, I know an app that does that.
Really?
Yeah, Instagram, sure. Surface connection.
Oh.
Also Grindr. Totally different podcast. But,
Tinder's kind of like that too.
yeah, Tinder. Ugh.
There's no way for us to do like voicing Grindr and voicing Tinder, is there?
I think this is a production meeting that we need to have after this.
Yeah.
Sure.
We'll debate and we'll come back
But like, I mean, I find it really. I went to a networking event last week.
Yeah.
Sure, I do networking events now.
Oh,
It was
that's
fabulous.
fancy.
It was about Polari, which is a language.
Mhm.
It was a
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
clandestine underground gay language
Yes.
that came from sort of Turkish and Yiddish
Mhm.
and a bit of other stuff.
So many things came from Yiddish. I just want to say that. Like,
Can I get an amen? Can I get an amen? So Polari was this language that was invented by gay men when being gay was illegal, and it
crazy to
still
think about.
exists in different places in the world, but a version of a Polari in various parts of the world exists where gay men are persecuted to this day. And sometimes it exists in theatre. Lots of people talk about things in theatre using terms in polarity. Not so much in like theatre, but in opera they often do. And again,
okay.
who work in opera who use lots of polarity terms. Anyway, so I went to this event and I was talking to people, and they kind of don't even really know the people they work with. They spend 7-8 hours a day with these people, and they kind of don't know anybody. One guy said to me, "Oh no, I'm head of IT. I don't talk to anyone." I was like, "What do you mean you don't talk to anyone?" He said, "Well, I don't like talking to people. I'd much rather they sent me an email." I was like, here's my card. I specialise in communication skills. And he was a really nice guy. Like, he was really communicative. He was really interesting. He was, could form a sentence. Sometimes rare.
Important.
Sometimes rare, but also true. And important. And, yeah, he just didn't want to have a connection with anybody else in the room.
You know what? So, this is... Okay. So... There are multiple things to this, but I just want to talk about that for a second, because I find that people do want to have a connection. They want to have a connection that they can control about, right? Like it's not like I don't want to interact with anyone. Like, you very rarely meet people, because they don't want to meet you, who don't want to connect with anyone or anything. But oftentimes, it's probably because we have so much control over various things in our life now that we didn't before in previous years and decades. They want to control how they interact with you. So no, I don't want to talk to you on the phone, but I want you to send me a text message. Or no, I don't want you to send me a text message. I'd rather you email me.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Right?
So there's like a caveat to the connection.
Yeah, it's a connection. I want to...
On my terms.
Yeah, exactly. And I think most of it has to do with rejection, isn't it? It's a lot easier to be rejected in email than it is to be rejected kind of in person, sometimes, depending on who's doing it. I get fabulous rejections. But, to be hashtagged. But I think there's something about vulnerability in that. And that, like, if I'm behind a screen, I'm not as vulnerable than if I'm standing in front of you.
This is totally my experience of life right now. And I am actively trying to rally against it. With the help of my therapist. Sure. But so much of the world is unconnected or disconnected from real life because you are hiding behind a screen. That when you start to have a conversation with somebody in real life, they kind of don't necessarily know how to handle that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So what they end up doing is delaying their response or skirting an issue and talking about something else, or just ignoring it and changing the subject.
Yeah.
And what often happens with interactions that are not face-to-face is that there is a sort of superficiality to it. But also because there aren't really any stakes, you might hurt somebody's feelings, but it doesn't matter because you're detached from it.
It's taking me straight back to, like, I know it was MSN here, but, like, I got, like, AIM, AOL. Because you would, like, if you had a crush on someone or whatever it was, they would normally ask you out via internet instant messaging first. And if you got a no, you had the night to cry about it at home on your phone with your friends or whatever it was. But it was in the privacy of that, rather than going to school and being rejected in person and having to walk around school for the rest of the day being like, oh.
Just cry in the toilet.
Yeah,
Sure.
Like a normal person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's what toilets are for, aren't they? Crying in, sure. Girls' toilets, definitely.
I think we used to write stuff in them.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't bother.
Yeah, we did.
Nobody took a Sharpie. Ugh.
We did. We're having a real nostalgic episode.
So about 90.
Because we used to have them on, like, keychains, like the Sharpies.
Did you?
Yeah, you know how Sharpie keychains?
No. Again, you're quite much younger than me.
Moving on, that's not important. Yeah, so there's something about connection in that, and then I I want to get on to connection in acting and
Sure,
and voice.
but I think we need to
and
just
stuff
get
like
this out of our system first.
that. Yeah, we do, because then I just thought about connection and culture. Because for me, coming to, I know I put a big one out there. Coming to the UK, connection works a tiny bit differently. It's not, weirdly enough, I was talking to a couple of students about this before, and they were saying every time I'm in a meeting with an American, they were doing like international business or something, when I'm in a meeting with Americans, they seem quite comfortable talking to you, and definitely talking at you. That's a whole other conversation.
Sure.
But they just seem more comfortable with that, where he was saying, in my culture, he was like, we are not brought up to be comfortable with that kind of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about it, and I was like, we get class participation like awards in America, and you get like attendance awards, but you get points for being loud and being extroverted, and that is considered not only a good form of connection and communication, but a valued form of connection, which could be great on some aspects, because you're like, oh, we create quite great speakers and thinkers and things of that nature. But if you're, say, more on the introverted side of it, then you can get punished for not being as great of an extrovert, or somebody who's really good at connecting in that way.
But then you also get this sort of superficiality of extrovertedness, insofar as, if you'll pardon the mention of the man, the President of the United States of America, who is, let's be honest, remarkably superficial, and is remarkably extroverted, and is very much about the sort of bluster, and is very sort of forthright and front foot about things, which in some respects, perhaps in business, where he claims to have been successful, that might be of benefit.
Yeah.
But within other aspects and sort of spheres of existence, perhaps not.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a very specific kind of connection, isn't it? It's really specific, and it's not the connection that I teach. But because it's
stop feeling and just show me.
I was like, just show me what you're doing. I don't want any feeling involved. Can you imagine? What is this feeling?
I mean, this is a whole other level. Can you imagine? I don't know. Can you imagine?
No, don't stop it.
Please do imagine.
But then there's a whole different level, because it is very superficial.
Yeah.
And if you poke it, it kind of deflates.
Yeah, it crumbles. And and
that's not what I want in my class.
No. But then I think it's really important to have that context to understand that, there's face-to-face connection where something really sort of makes sense, or you can sort of see the whites of somebody's eyes and see whether or not they're lying to you or not. And then, do you know what I mean? You're kind of like, interesting, you totally had shifty behaviour when you said that, which you don't get from speaking to somebody via email or by text message. And also, you also don't get prosody. So you don't get subtext.
Yes.
So then things are misconstrued, which is why, and lots of people have been talking about it in the last few weeks, Twitter and people being offended by things. And you're like, well, I might not have meant it in the way that it came across, because you've read it with your subtext as opposed to my subtext. And the vast majority of people, as we've also discussed on a number of occasions, people don't necessarily read the subtext or the options for subtext that are contained within a piece of text.
Yeah.
So what happens is the first thing that occurs to them has to be the right thing. And what we know from working on complex texts with actors is that sometimes your first choice is not the best choice, and sometimes your first choice is not the only choice, and then we have to go, hey, might it also mean this?
I hope your first choice is not the only choice. Really hope so.
Because that choice.
Because that is not a great choice.
Do you know what I mean? So there's like this kind of thing about being offended or whatever, and also like the text, and so people are going to take things on face value despite the fact that there is no face value to it,
Yeah.
insofar as there's no expression in it. It's literally just the words on a page or the words on a screen.
This is so deep because I was thinking about like two things. So I'm thinking about the intent, right? Because I got into a big because there's still this kind of thing about the authorial intent.
Right.
So the author's intent of a text,
Okay.
and whether that means anything in terms of your connection to it. And in some cases, like, you know, if I'm doing poetry and I ask them to go out and get a poem, it might, because they might say, oh, this is my favorite poet, and this is a story about the poem, and I feel connected to the story of the poem, and then the process of it, and then the actual product, which is the poem itself. Fine, fantastic. How do I put that into the performance of it, though? Is that is how is that going to impact your performance? Does it impact your performance? Is it something that we're looking at the micro of it? Is it a particular word, a particular sound that is repeated that you like, or that you I don't know. I was writing this thing for a conference that I'm speaking of. Yes. Which I'll talk about later. But and I was talking about the fact that a word can have so many different connections to you.
Absolutely.
And that could be a dialect thing. Like you might have, it could be an accent thing. So I've got a lot of students who are like, well, sometimes I say bath and sometimes I say bath. And when we really dig into it, they don't. But there are certain words that can happen with, right? That you can say, if you go to America, that you might say restroom, and you come to the UK and you say toilet. And those are very specific geographic things, but they bring with them both a social construction to it, a cultural construction to it, and also an emotion to it. Like, so yes, it serves a function in terms of a connection to what group do I belong to? Am I British? Am I American? Right? But then, what was I doing in that moment? Were they pleasant? Was it a pleasant interaction where I had to keep saying the word toilet? Or was someone constantly going, it's not a bathroom, there's a bath in there, which people do.
True.
But it's a fair point.
Unless it's in a house, in which case, often, there is a bath.
Yeah.
Sure.
Or was it something where, you know, I don't know, a little old lady had said it to you, and you're like, oh, you know, and it was a cute moment, and you kept that. And then it becomes something that's quite emotional with you. And the word takes on a whole life differently.
Yeah. Which takes us back to mimetics.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, what do you
Always
mean
going back
by...
to
Yeah,
mimetics.
always coming back to mimetics. So, like, what is it that it means to you? What is the image that's in your mind? What is the connection to it? And actually, if we bring it full circle back to connection again,
Wow.
that thing of, like, if somebody says, bread
Yeah.
to you, what leaps into your mind when I say bread? So, for me right now, a really nice sort of granary wholemeal, really like big sort of cob loaf that's kind of crusty and a bit floury and like just really hungry. So like, do you know what I mean? Like having that and then having, so what goes with that that's going to make it even more delicious and wonderful? And so like something I'm kind of like craving something sort of wholesome and that sort of stuff. But somebody listening to this, or you might have then thought of, you know, just sliced white bread. Or like a little bread roll, or like a bagel, or a bagel, depending on where you're from, right? And then like, or it could be, I don't know, a flour tortilla, or it could be like a crumpet, or do you know what I mean? It could be, or an English muffin, as you guys are so wont to say. But it could be anything like a bread product. And is it a slice, or is it a loaf, or is it a... And so you kind of have all this stuff that's going on. And when you talk about bread, what does that mean to you? Is it rye? Is it whole? Is it like what is the whole thing? And so the connection for each individual is going to be different relative, not just to the image they have in their mind, but their experience, as you've just said, of that thing. Yeah. And so I have a student who I taught many years ago, and he recently came back for some lessons in this very room, in fact. Lovely, lovely student. And his father is a baker, and they're German, and they own a German bakery in South London.
this is the best thing that's ever happened. So
I know. I love bakery. It's brilliant. But my student then was like, oh my god, all I want is like, you know, white bread, like just out of a packet. Like I've never had it my whole life. And if I have another piece of bread that has like seeds in it and is like good for you and it's like
freshly baked
and it smells amazing. I was like, really? It's like, oh, if I have another one ever, I'm going to kill myself. Like he just hated it. He just got to the stage where he was like, I just don't want good bread that people like, you know, oh, it's such good bread. All I want is the worst example of bread that you can possibly give me. My dad would hate it that I'm eating it, but that's all I want. And I was like, oh God, no. You can't even see that as a thing. I want like a really like crusty, lovely, crunchy bread that I can really get my teeth into. And he was like, no. So even though we were talking about the same thing, and I was having a really wonderful kind of warm, generous reaction to the bread that his father would cook and bake, and he was like, worst thing in the world, all I want is out of the packet. We were literally talking the opposite way, but he could have had that same reaction to bread as an overall concept. But because he's sort of inundated with it, he was like, ugh. Yeah. So, from an actor's perspective, what does bread mean to you, the actor? Is that a nice experience? Is that not a nice experience? Are you gluten intolerant? More importantly, are you celiac?
I was just going to say.
Right? Not intolerant, but like, do you actually have celiac disease? And therefore you cannot eat it because it literally brings you out in hives and makes you...
But you have a secret desire for it anyway.
Right? And so what does that mean? And that's like really exciting and interesting and kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
Like a beekeeper who has, you know, severe anaphylaxis but just can't stay away from the bees.
This is becoming a whole new podcast.
No.
Really just creating stories on the spot. I love it.
Sure.
But I let
I let bees do what?
Nitty. I love the fact that it all comes from a word. And even more than a word, a sound. And I'm really
phonemes.
I'm such a phoneme. I'm such a phoneme person because I'm like, I always go around and do that thing. It's like if you were going to express love, what sound would you use to express love? And then can we plug those into a word? What words do you have that express love through that word? You know, and I get so geeky and excited about it.
Nice.
Because then we start doing different languages. I'm like, ooh, and then I get off track and I come back because there's a voice class, not a language class. But anyway, the connection is such an interesting thing because you'll hear people talk about voice being this thing that is separate from language. Like there are definitely people who are on that kind of spectrum where they're like, there is voice and we have language to communicate, but the voice is pure. Like that's something that we're working on. But my whole thing is that they both fuel each other. Right, so the voice fuels the language. Without language, you know, the voice would almost be like we'd just be shouting at each other, I guess.
So what would you say?
Yeah. Well, maybe we would find another way to communicate. I had a whole conversation about this with students before about what happens in the absence of language, what comes, and just a side note, just really quickly, because then I start thinking like even if you don't have, say, the words, right? We still communicate in another way because of all those paralinguistic utterances,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And even though we don't consider those to be a language, they are a means of communication. And so it is a different kind of code, isn't it? Which could technically be considered a language, even though it doesn't necessarily have a syntactic structure or morphemes or things of that nature. And you...
I'm like, you're the linguist, so I'm just going to nod and smile for a minute, but I'm kind of thinking that maybe not true. But sure, yeah, go on.
Well, in a way, like it's not as complex as what we know as languages to be. But if we take a kind of very simple version of language as being something that communicates something else, because we then have like body language, right?
Yeah. Which of course isn't a language, but
right, but it's a mode of communication.
Like, sure, yeah.
So then there's something special that happens with what happens when you strip away the words and you just have the voice,
Mm.
and then working with the voice to enhance the words, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Working with the words to get to the voice, and you get to this weird kind of thing of communication and connection, which I think is quite beautiful, and that's why I like to do what I do.
The thing that always occurs to me at that point, with what happens in the absence of language, is kind of the absence of thought.
Oh, this is deep. Yes.
I know. Sorry.
Yes.
But it's the absence of thought insofar as what we know about cognition is that the more an expression is that the more sophisticated your understanding of your ability to express, the less the sort of less frustrated you are, firstly, and also then the more imaginative you can be, because you can imagine things that are beyond just the tactile and the concrete.
Right.
Because I often talk about this with students, and I'm kind of like, well, to quote Shakespeare, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And they go, what do you mean? I'm like, okay, who speaks other languages in the room? And then they'll say, oh, someone will go, I speak another language. What language do you speak? Oh, French. I'm like, well, what's a rose in French? And they're like, rose. I'm like, sure. So it is said in a different way, but it still smells the same, right? And they're like, yeah. And then we'll talk about various different things, and like basically, how do we know that this thing is called a table? Well, it's not always called a table. Sometimes it's called a mesa. Sometimes it's called a table. Sometimes it's called, any number of a myriad of things. And then what do? We kind of go, okay, this is the table. And you go, okay, cool, table. And then what do? We close our eyes and we walk away from the table. And we go, hey, remember that table? And then we're like, oh my God, yeah. Does the table exist if we're talking about it, but we're not looking at it?
Yeah.
And then you go, then it becomes philosophical and existential.
Well, it's that semantic question, isn't it? Is the phoneme tied to the meaning?
Sorry, just had a little braingasm there. Is the phoneme tied to the meaning?
Right. So if you line up a bunch of phonemes, so the whole thing was that, I don't know what, we weren't supposed to do math. Connection brings you into lots of weird
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But it's that thing of it kind of being a double. One thing is explicitly tied to the other thing. It's your signified and signifier, right? So if you line up a whole bunch of phonemes, let's say randomly, and they come into cat, right? Is there anything specific about the animal cat that has provided a k, a, and a t sound? And if you change it, will it still apply to that sound? And the answer is obviously no, right?
No.
Because you can take cat
And make it tack or act.
Right? And you get a completely different thing.
Or act.
Right. And then if you add a morpheme to it, you get cats, right? So no, but then yes, because we know very specifically that if I say the word cat, something resembling the concept of what we know to be cats or surrounding that pops up. Then we can move on to a whole other layer, which maybe you've had a very traumatic experience with a cat once in your life. And so the only thing that comes up is just fear. Yeah?
Yeah. And then also, it feels like almost what happens is you come up with like a species. So when someone says cat, you go, okay, species. Feline, cat, something. So whether that's a lion, or whether that's a kitten, or an ocelot. I love the word ocelot. Or... Sorry, the well-known Stephen Fry joke that he tells often, which is, how do you titillate an ocelot?
How?
You oscillate his titillot. Which is really stupid. Just every time I say ocelot, I'm like, ocelot. But, what is... So you kind of get a species and then you have to sort of narrow it down. And again, as you said, like, if your experience of a cat has been overwhelmingly positive or overwhelmingly negative, then your response will be relatively in line with that.
Yeah. And even if you plug it into, say, like a text, oftentimes what you get is when students read the first time, they're just reading, say, the concept of that word, not the second or third meaning of it, or not whatever it connects to, either within the context or within a play or within a character, because that takes another kind of level of analytics of looking at it in that perspective. And so part of the work is taking it and looking and saying, oh yeah, okay, so here's the nuts and bolts of it. Someone's talking about going and eating ice cream. Yeah, so there's an actual physical thing. We're going to go and eat the ice cream. This is how it's going to happen. But then if we think about possibly what the meaning of ice cream is it good? Do we like ice cream? Is ice cream a metaphor in the whole play? Can you eat ice cream? Are you lactose intolerant? Is this going to be a dreadful thing? Is someone going to tell you that your mother possibly died at the ice cream shop and you kind of already know this and never got
and then it tastes ice cream.
Yeah. And so what is happening
Or
with
like my
ice
experience
cream?
as a child of always having a cone, like a cone with a soft whip ice cream, and then every time I went to lick it,
It fell off?
it fell off.
Yeah.
Every time. So I can't be bothered with ice cream anymore.
Mine is, I have really sensitive front teeth. And so but I still like ice cream. I was determined to like it.
No, I just didn't. I was like, ugh, can't be bothered.
You're better than I was, because I was like, I will like this thing.
I had mango sorbet yesterday. That was a nice experience. Delicious.
Sometimes it can be too
Fruity.
sweet for me. Depends on who makes it.
I mean, it was probably just out of a box. I don't really know. I paid a fortune for it. But then that's really interesting, like the different layers of the connections and reading it at first and just sort of making an initial assessment of what it is that it means, but then not necessarily delving any deeper on a first reading of something, like as an acting student or as an actor. And that then you actually have to like reread it and read it a third or a fourth time to really start to notice that there are other layers to it, and that actually maybe your initial response to something when it's text is not necessarily the response of the character. It might be your actor response, it might be your individual response, but is not necessarily, or in any way, shape or form, necessarily going to be the character's response.
And to bring that back around to what you were saying earlier about communication and how things get missed in tweets and things of that nature, that's the same thing. A lot of times, and if we were going further about it into like the pragmatics of what we do in a conversation, that lots of times we have a motivation for talking to someone. And if you mess up and you start to read your motivation as someone else's motivation, the whole conversation can go blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right? We miss the whole thing because you're too busy thinking about you and then putting you onto everyone else. And you go around miscommunicating with people because this is a lot of times, if you've got lots of social anxiety and you start to think, oh my God, everyone's judging me. Just because you judge other people does not mean that other people go around judging other people.
Yeah.
And and that's a whole nother conversation for another thing, because maybe there's a time limit of judgment, but judgments are needed to make decisions and blah, 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 blah. But that's a first read of it, right? It's like just if you were to go and say either stand up and teach a class for the first time, and if you're petrified of doing that, as I was, the first read is, oh my gosh, they're going to slaughter me. Right? It's like they're just going to... And if you teach young people, like 8 years old, or anything in that vicinity, there's a slight possibility that they might. Yeah. But that's your first reading of it. But as you kind of sit in it, you realize they don't want to, right? They don't want to have a bad experience.
No, they want to have a good experience.
They want to have a good experience in your class. But oftentimes it's not the first reading that we have in that scenario. And most times, if you get up and say it's the same thing, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm petrified, I'm going to mess it up. None of us want you to mess it up. We all want to have a really great time here.
And that's the same thing with auditions. as well. I say this just to people all the time. Just like you do know that whoever's auditioning you desperately wants you to be the person who walks into the room and just goes, bang, I'm the person that you want. And they go, oh, yes, you are the person I want. Send everyone else home. Yes. And like, often they don't send everybody else home, so they'll sit through everybody else. But the point is that they always want you to do the best and be the person who is going to be the answer to their, search in that given moment. So that it's not just like, my watch has gone off. So like, it's not just some random event where you turn up and they want you to fail. It's a specific event where you turn up and they want you to succeed.
Yeah.
So, and much like teaching as well in a certain context, but with actors, we also have to, as voice people, teach people how to read the subtext.
Oh, yeah.
Because for whatever reason, they will just read the surface thing. And then we actually have to teach people, no. There is also something else that's going on here. And maybe because of the stress pattern that you're using, because of the intonational pattern that you're using, because of the inflective pattern that you're using, etc., ad nauseum, you're not really getting the message across. So think about maybe what your key word is in that phrase. And then people start to realise that maybe what they're saying is not what they first thought.
Yes. And you had a thing about connection of thought, and I don't remember what it was. You said it really nicely. This is why I write things down. I'm going to say my thing, and I feel like it's going to spark your thing, so I'm going to go ahead.
Okay, fine, do it.
Because I often teach the connection of having the thought, then the breath, and then saying the word. It's a very simple thing of thinking before you speak, really.
Yeah.
Where it's like, here's the thought, and if I'm going to say, maybe my word is cat, but my thought, I'm having a thing with cats, today, sure. I really am. But maybe the thought is, I'm really exhausted, and I want you to know that I'm exhausted, and I don't want to be like eating lunch with you right now. So I had that thought of exhaustion, desperation, whatever it is. I take the breath, cat, right, and then you say it. And sure, it could take a long time to do that for every single word. So we do it in phrase or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But as long as you're connecting that back to the thought. Because oftentimes what ends up happening is that you get a bunch of text, and you look at it, and a lot of people just go, nah, I'm just going to say it, and then halfway through, they find that, and somebody shouts out, it's not connected to anything, or what does it mean?
Yeah, and that people then recite. And,
which is a different skill.
Yeah. But even then, I don't feel like in a contemporary age, here we go, in a contemporary age, people want to sit and listen to, or stand and listen to recitation. What they want is something that is connected at all times. Whether you're listening to a politician, whether you're listening and your local MP or your president or your prime minister, whether you're listening to an actor talking about an experience that this character has had, and this actor talking as character about this experience that they've had, whether it's, whatever, it could be any kind of thing, but I often give the note afterwards where I congratulate an actor for giving me a wonderful recitation. And they're just like, oh, that's a really bad note. I'm like, well, you knew all the words. I don't care, but you knew all the words. And there is a thing about knowing the words. Yeah, you've got to know the words. Fine. That's not even the end of page 1 in how to do this. So it's more important that I often say to people, I'd rather you had the book in your hand, but had a real connection to what you were saying, than had memorised it. Memorisation doesn't impress me much, should I tell you? But do you know what I mean? It's like, I don't care that you've learnt the words. What I care is that you have a connection to it.
Yeah.
So let's go back and let's look at, what does it mean for you to say that word? What does it mean for you to say, to express that phrase, illustrating the thought that's in your head about a feeling that you have that connects to me as another human being? Then say it. And then often student actors say, what, for every line? I'm like,
Yeah.
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 Every single thought,
It's hard work.
every moment, every gesture, everything that you do on stage. And the thing that I find excruciatingly frustrating is watching things on stage and on film, but less on film because often they just edit it and cut to a different shot. Certainly on stage, where I'm watching actors wait for their line.
Yeah.
Why are you waiting for your line? You're still alive. You're still doing something.
Yeah.
You're still in that space. That character is still breathing.
Yeah.
And is alive.
You're still breathing.
You're still breathing.
Hopefully.
You're still alive. Why have you sort of powered down?
Yeah.
And then power up again, ready to just in time for your cue to be able to say something.
Does that like in real life? Like, do you ever just wait and just go?
Stop breathing. Just become like a scared rabbit.
I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting for you to say something, so I can then say something.
Yeah.
Else. I mean, there is what you will get is that I'm just waiting for you to finish so I can say something.
Yeah.
But even that has a motivation behind that. Even that has like a different, like an intention behind it. It's like I really have something I want to say.
It's almost like, guys, you should go back and listen to one of our earliest episodes about listening.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So we totally talked about it.
We have.
Which doesn't mean we're running out of stuff.
No.
No.
Connection
not
is
by
just
a long shot. But we
Right.
are schematizing this for you guys. And for ourselves occasionally. Literally in the moment of saying it, we're like, oh my god, that's so connected.
Okay.
Which we already sort of knew, but then sometimes you say it out loud and then it's like, it's a thing.
Does it exist?
That's on the internet, that's on Apple,
exactly.
iTunes.
This is one of the things, does it exist if you don't say it out loud? Because you might know it,
Oh.
but only you have it. Does it exist if it's not something that you can communicate and share with somebody else?
Hashtag therapy. And also, can't believe I just used a hashtag. And also,
So,
I have had several realizations in my life about myself and about situations that I found myself in that I have known in my heart and I've known in my head, but until I stood there and actually said it out loud, I didn't want to do it.
Like, I've had the same thing, and it can be, a lot of times it's with love, like, you really feeling something towards someone, and it doesn't, and you're like, oh, I got this funny feeling, like, I really like being around this person, and blah, 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 and it's like, I don't know what that is, and then you stop, and you go, oh, I love this person. But it doesn't really kind of hit you until you put it outside of yourself, and you kind of see it floating around. And I think that's what voice kind of does. It takes something internal and it puts it outside of you, so you can go, look, there it is. You can hear it. It's creating a consequence. There's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, because you can never take it back.
No, you can shape it, and you can manipulate it.
You can try.
You can't say, oh no.
And
You can't delete it like a tweet.
No.
Hence why you need to breathe and think before you speak.
And check in with yourself. Check in before you wreck
somebody
it.
Somebody used to say that quite a lot. I think it was one of our teachers. They said, check in with yourself.
Check in with yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know. Lots of people say that.
Yeah. It's just like, see what words do. I'm just like babbling to you.
Yeah, a flurry of words.
So, Leon.
Aundrea.
What have you learned? I don't know what the word is I'm supposed to use. It's not learned. Discovered? Realized. Sorry, I apologize. Realization. What have you realized?
I've realised the interconnectivity
like that.
of connection. I've also realised that I find your hair fascinating when it is straightened but not relaxed.
It's also not really straight. Like, it's straight, but it's not...
It's wavy. I've never seen it like this.
Yeah. It's also because it's quite frizzy. And there's a lot of volume to
There is volume in a Diana Ross kind of way.
Yeah. You just have to look at stuff like
it
that.
Is. If you pardon the pun. Supreme. And with that, good night. No, Aundrea.
Yeah.
What have you realised?
I I just realized that we're basically like wearing the same outfit. Like,
you've got loads of hair and no glasses, and I've got no hair and loads of glasses.
yeah.
When I say
But, like,
loads of, I've literally just got one pair.
The sweater is like similar colors, and we were both wearing the similar color jeans. So,
Well, your boots are
which
black.
you can't see.
My boots are a tan.
So realization. Oh gosh. Connection. I really want to start singing the Rainbow Connection, but I think it's so many songs
about rainbows.
But I think what I realized about connection is how massive it is, and I always get into this thing when I start talking about connection because I inevitably start talking about my nieces and I inevitably start talking about
But you're in good company.
Semiotics. It takes me to this weird kind of thing, but I think my realization is it is in everything that we do, that we seek a connection through almost everything that we do. And it needs to be honored. That's what I'll say. Honor your connection through your daily life. This has turned into like a weird meditation.
Oh my god, you get a car, you turn into Oprah.
It's the hair.
Yeah,
The bigger the hair gets,
hair.
the more Oprah I get.
Honor your connection in everyday life.
Yeah, in your daily life.
In your daily life.
Yeah.
Okay, that's going on Twitter.
Got it.
Might make a meme.
Ooh.
If you want to contact us about anything we said in the podcast, you can reach us on Twitter at CanYouHearPod.
Or on Instagram at Can You Hear Me Podcast.
Or you can search for us on Facebook and on YouTube.
Or email us at canyouhearmeattheback@gmail.com.
You can find me, Leon, on Twitter at Leon Trayman.
Or me, Aundrea, at Aundrea Fudge on Twitter.
Please support the podcast by subscribing as a patron on our Patreon site
The link is in the show notes.
to keep the podcast advertisement free, as well as get access to cool extra stuff, discounts, bonus episodes, as well as supporting ongoing voice research funding as well. Okay, love you, bye!